everyone. Today I'm gonna talk you about SSR and my personal journey into SSR. Let's dive into it. So first, presentation is in order. So my name is Emanuele Stoppa. I'm Italian, as you might understand from my accent. I live in Ireland. I'm a core contributor of the Biome project, and I belong to the team platform of the Astro project, and I'm also an avid console gamer. So by the time that this video will come out, probably I will play Final Fantasy VII. Now we're gonna start our journey talking about this coordinated framework, which is essentially my first experience with SSR, and we're gonna arrive and end our journey with Astro. And that's where things will get interesting. I will see why. Now, first of all, what's server-side rendering? So, thing is, it's changed over the years, you know? Like, when I actually started, server-side rendering was how you make websites, you know? So it's how you make them. But then, you know, Node.js came along, new partners, new possibilities, new tools, blah, 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 and things got different, new patterns, and so on. But essentially, it's when a server gives you HTML and you give it to your client. So you render a page on your server, and that's it. So that's really, really basic. So now we understand what's SSR, okay? Let's start with my first experience. So it was the 2010. I was came out from the university, was 1 year after, and PHP was my first experience. So I was a PHP developer, and I got to work with CodeIgniter, which is a framework based on MVC, which stands for Model View Controller. Just to give you a rundown of what's this pattern, essentially you have your own class, which is the controller that has all the logic, the business logic of your page. Then you have the model. Model is usually that entity that takes care of everything around your data. So the CRUD operations, validations, and whatnot. So it has it connects with the database and talks with the database. And then you have the view. So the view is usually, you call it inside your controller. You can also have multiple views, reuse all the views. And the view, it's usually a templating language. So this is an example of a templating language. If you use, for example, Vue and Svelte, you already know what's a templating language. And that's how I used to do it back in the day, you know. So it hasn't changed that much. With Vue and Svelte, they have a different syntax, but I mean the concept it's the same. We interpolate the templated language with the variables. We spit out HTML and we give it to the browser. So that's my first. That's how I started. And then jQuery came along. So jQuery was a revolution at that time. It's how I learned JavaScript. And here's an example of how I used it with SSR. So I had my jQuery, all right, and there was another MVC framework which is called Grails. Grails is based on this language called Groovy. It compiles in JVM. As I said, it's still an MVC. And what I did was essentially we had some requirements where we wanted to have some animations without going out from the user page. So what you usually do at the time was you create a new endpoint with a controller model view specifically for the user for this need. You spit out only the HTML that you want to have, and then with jQuery, you just do a get, you get your HTML, and and then you do animations and so on. So with jQuery, you could replace an HTML with another using animations. That's how client-side rendering was back in the day. It was a really, at the end you could do all your strategies and things like that. But that's how I was able to play with these kinds of stuff. It was really, really interesting. And I was in charge also of the controllers and the views. So I could just go there in the framework, create a new controller with new parameters. And it was really fun at that time. Then we have Sencha. I'm not going to bother you about Sencha Touch. It's essentially an all-in-one mobile framework to build essentially web apps. You have your stores, you have your components, views, models, and everything. But it didn't take it so much interested. It was like a few years before React came along. It was really boring. Not that, I got to learn a lot of stuff, but you were essentially caged into the framework, okay? And now that's where we start getting interesting stuff, okay? Yes, React came along and it had really nice features, and some of these features were like really refreshing and I wanted to use them, right? So yeah, but there's always a but. So I had this project, I wanted to use React a lot, and my manager said, let's use it. But still, we are in an enterprise world, so things aren't perfect. In this project, there were some restrictions. So the website was pumped by a Microsoft.NET framework, specifically a CMS called Umbraco. And it's like a WordPress. You have your back office, you can customize it, but also the website is provided. The actual website is rendered by WordPress. Same thing with Umbraco. So, but I wanted to use React. So how did I do that? Well, yes, I wrote my SSR framework, and yes, it's a meme, but that's true. But the thing is, at that time, there weren't really frameworks to do that, neither in .NET. I was riding unsounded grounds at that time, so I had to come up with something. Well, the thing is, writing your own SSR framework is not that difficult. It's actually easier than you think. There are just 3 principles that you have to follow. So you must have a global state manager. At that time, Redux was the place to go. You need to have a runtime. So at that time, Node.js was the way to go. You could englobe it everywhere. You just run it, and it gives you what you need using a script, and then iterate the page. So once you have these 3 things, you can have your SSR framework. So let's look briefly at what I did that time. So I had a .NET framework, so there was a template engine, as we saw before. So usually you go to a page and you have your own Redux global state. That's a global object, and essentially for each page you inject the initial global state of your page. All right. Then you must have this runtime. So fortunately at that time there was this library that allowed you to parse a React framework, and it was able to give you the actual HTML. It was like a runtime inside the template engine. It was really fast. There were no overhead whatsoever, even because the pages usually that contain React components were really small, so we didn't need to render the whole page. All right, so we had pages where we had a React component here or a React component there, so it was a mix. of static HTML and React components. So once you have this HTML, you have it in your template engine, and at the end, what we go back to our page, we need to actually fetch the ID of where the React component was rendered and iterate it. So as you can see, it's not that difficult. So these are the foundations of essentially creating your own SSR framework. And then you just need to connect these foundations using the libraries that you have, and the job is done. Like there's no rocket science. And I was actually really proud of that work, and I went to check it. This website still uses the same logic. So, I mean, that was a really good choice. Sure, things have changed, but it still works. Okay, now we go with a more modern approach, and that's where Next.js comes into play. So yeah, I got to work with Next.js as well. It's really great framework, and with get static props, life was way easier. Like get static props, eliminated a bunch of that work that I explained, because that's what the Next.js at that time did. So it creates your own global state and whatnot. But Next.js also has more, like progressive client-side routing and other stuff. It's a really good framework. Actually, it is. But enterprise is different. Yes. So at that time, we had a really weird constraints. So our backend didn't have any servers at all, but we could use only lambdas. Like the backend was using lambdas, and for them was great, but for us, that was quite challenging. The initial version of the website was sparse, so we had an HTML page with static JavaScript, and so create React app. So it was a fork of create React app, but the SEO was actually of the website was negatively penalized, so we had to do something. At that time, Next.js introduced a new option called output serverless or something like that would allow to export each page as a serverless artifact, not a lambda, a serverless artifact. That was great for us. It was great. So what did they do? Well, guess what? I built my own deployment layer. So it's like I built my meta framework. Exactly so. And it was actually really, really fun. Now let's see what did I do. All right. So Next.js, as I said before, creates this artifact for each page. All right. Then my meta framework essentially hooks the Next.js serverless build. So programmatically, we run the build. And this build gives me all the information needed to actually create a lambda for each page. So at the end of the build, we had all these lambdas that we were able to deploy in the different environments, execute them at each request, and get just the page that we asked for, and have client-side navigation from there. That's how Next.js used to work at that time. So this lambda actually is not just a lambda. So I was more. Okay, so there's actually the real lambda built dynamically. We then had the compact layer. Compact layer that takes the event pass from the lambda and create a response request. And these response requests were passed to the artifact page. Because the artifact was not, as I said before, AWS Lambda friendly. It's just takes like an incoming request, Node.js like. So we needed a compact layer to translate his own information. And then we had the Terraform resources. So the Meta framework created dynamically all the Terraform files that then eventually were called at the end of the build. So eventually, what did I do? I open sourced everything. So I took all the logic that I built for the company. I just added a CLI in front with few options. And yeah, I mean, I thought I did something great. I mean, sure, it's a really niche case what I have, but maybe someone else is facing the same issues. So I open sourced it, but now it's actually archived because Next.js removed the serverless option. So, I mean, we can't use it anymore. And eventually we come to Astro. So I work at Astro and I build actually some nice stuff that I'm gonna show you. But before going to that, I will unveil some secrets about Astro. So we you know about SSG, static site generation, or static websites. But you know that actually SSG in Astro is SSR with an extra step? Yes, because when we actually build it, we actually run SSR. We create all these pages, write artifacts, files. We import them, we execute them, and then like they were like a request response. When we get their response, the HTML, and we render it, and we put them in an HTML file. So it's SSR all over the place, you know? But then what's SSR in Astro? Well, it's actually SSR with a different build step. So we just have a different configuration and we emit these artifacts with a different thing, in a generic way. So adapters can actually consume them and build them actually as they prefer. So we have a generic way to export and also an interface to export the pages of the routes, let's call them. And then the adapters such as Node.js, Dino, Vercel, Cloudflare, Netlify, and so on, which have different requirements, can take these artifacts, manipulate them if they need, and create their own configurations based on their needs. So it's like what I did before, like with the Meta framework. Essentially, that's what Astro does. But there's more. Like recently, I got to create a couple of niche features, really nice in Astro, using SSR and a bunch of other tools. One is function per route. So what does it mean? So by default, this is how SSR looks like in Astro. So we have just one single file that handles all your routes. Okay, so and when we hit and when the server, actually the client, requests one route, we actually dynamically import the artifact that belongs to that page and return its response. Instead, with function per route, we have multiple entry points. Okay, so it's actually a niche case. Nobody needs something like this. But if you have like a really heavy pages with a lot of code, a lot of JavaScript, sometimes this use case might help you, because essentially it's like code splitting on the serverless platform. Okay. Another amazing thing is Edge middleware. So a few months ago, I released and released the Astro middleware. And a few months later, we actually added Edge middleware that can be used in platforms such as AWS, Vercel, and so on. So this is how Astro middleware works. Okay, so you have your request, it passes through the middleware. We have these Astro locals that essentially are information data that you can pass to your Astro component. It can be anything. It's an object, and you can also pass functions. And you use them to render your component, or you might not. So, and eventually you get a response. On the edge, this is a little bit different, but it managed to actually use the same middleware and made it work. So everything starts from the request. We generate this edge function. Usually the edge middleware is an edge function, okay, that is very close to the user. That's why it's called edge. And this edge function calls the actual Astro middleware, okay? But then we need to render the Astro component. So how do we do that? This is platform specific, okay? In Vercel, you actually have a next function, but also like in Netlify, for example, you can call next. Or actually in Vercel, you can actually make a fetch call to the origin. So the origin is the actual file that renders your page, okay, your component, anything that returns some HTML. And as I said before, on Vercel, inside the edge function, we create a next function. This function, what does it do? It actually does a fetch to the origin. And when we do the fetch, we pass these locals. So these locals, as I said before, in this case, they are serialized and then passed via headers to the Astro component, and then eventually they can be used. And everything is done using rollup and Vite. So there's a typo, apology for that. And yeah, so thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed my journey, and bye.